Hello, and today we've got Martin from Staffordshire with us. Hello, Martin. How are you today?
I'm all right, thank you very much, Sheelagh.
That's good.
My usual answer to that question is I'm alive, by the
way. Well, that's also good. Would you like to share your stroke story with us?
Certainly. How long have you got?
As long as you need.
There's an awful lot to tell.
Tell away, we're all ears.
Right, well, to start from the very, very beginning, I was a journalist for all of my working life before my stroke. I got my first job in 1986 when I was 22, and I worked on various newspapers across the West Midlands for nearly 30 years until I had my stroke in 2013.
Right.
The last 5 years of that, from the end of 2009, the last 4 years, sorry, from the end of 2009, I was working as a freelance because I was made redundant from the company I was working for at the end of 2009. So from 2009 till the 16th of December 2013, when I had my stroke, I was working as a freelance. Right. The majority of my work as a freelance was editing a magazine, a national magazine, on a series of 1-year rolling contracts. And that all went very, very well until the summer of 2013, when the personnel at the top of the company I was working for decided to change the chairman. And that was my new boss, basically. And that person decided that they didn't like me from day one. And they wanted me out from day one. And they made it very plain that they wanted me out from day one. And I couldn't do anything right. Everything that I did, they picked holes in. And having had 3.5 years where I really enjoyed it, the last 6 months were utter hell, basically. Mm. And I decided that at the end of 2014, I was going to leave that job and take on another freelance role, look for another freelance role. I was going to do 1 more year and then I would leave. But then on the 1st of December 2013, at 7 o'clock in the evening, just as my wife was dishing up the Sunday roast, I got a 2-minute phone call in which the chairman told me that they didn't want my services anymore. They were going in another direction, which turned out to be the previous editor of the magazine, by the way. And they were going to be making me redundant effectively as of the 31st of December. Oh. And anybody that works in HR will know that you don't sack people in a 2-minute phone call at 7 o'clock on a Sunday night.
Yeah.
It was certainly unethical. It was quite probably illegal, but I couldn't prove it. I was utterly devastated because I'd made the 2 big mistakes that freelance people make in all walks of freelance life. I'd made the mistake of thinking that they wanted me more than I wanted them. And I also made the mistake of thinking that they would never get rid of me. And obviously they did in a 2-minute phone call. The next 2 weeks were complete and utter hell because that was 90% of my working and my income had gone from when they told me that they didn't want me anymore. I was doing other freelance work, but it was only a very small minority of my income. So I was devastated and I was panicking massively. I was running all around the country doing lots and lots of networking, trying to find other ways of finding jobs, and I was getting absolutely nowhere. I was spending money I hadn't got on networking meetings, on petrol, getting to meetings, and it just wasn't working. And I remember that on Monday morning, 2 weeks after this had happened, on the 16th of December 2013, as I said, I went into Birmingham about 20 minutes from where I live on the train for a business meeting to talk about the possibility of editing a magazine for somebody. I spent all morning in that meeting, had some lunch in Birmingham, and caught the 2:48 train home from Birmingham to Tamworth. I got to Tamworth at just after 3 o'clock, around about 3:10. And where I live is a 10-minute walk from the railway station. And I set off on this walk, and about halfway home, I have to cross a road. It's called Victoria Road. It's one of the busiest roads in Tamworth Town Centre, if not the busiest. It's the one where all the buses and the taxis congregate. So there's a lot of traffic around. Even at 3:10 on a Monday afternoon, there's a lot of traffic around.
Yeah.
And I prepared to cross the road. Being a child of the 1970s, I did the green cross code thing. I looked left and right and made sure the traffic was clear, and it was. So I stepped into the road, and suddenly my legs gave way underneath me. I fell to the floor, paralysed down to one side, and I suddenly realised, as I collapsed to the floor, I realised that I had the most explosive headache I'd ever had. If I ever get around to writing my autobiography, it'll be called The Atom Bomb in My Brain.
Oh, gosh.
Because what had happened, of course, and people listening to this will know what happened. I'd had an artery burst in the back of my brain, in my cerebellum. I'd had a hemorrhagic stroke. One where, as I always try to describe it to lay people, it's something where blood gets into the bits of your brain where it's not supposed to be. I'd had an artery, as I said, it was an artery in my cerebellum at the back of my brain. That cerebellum, of course, being the part that controls your balance and coordination and things like that. And I do find, by the way, that once you have a stroke, you do tend to learn rather more about the brain than you ever thought you would need to know. And believe me, I know a lot about it. So anyway, I collapsed in the road. I've got this explosive headache. And as I said, in this road, there's an awful lot of buses and taxis and cars around. And as I collapsed in the road, there was a 47-seater bus coming.
Oh, gosh.
And it missed me by the width of your computer keyboard. I can vividly remember lying under the wheel arch of the bus, paralysed down my left side, waiting for that bus to crush me. I do very often get asked, was I completely coherent and awake and conscious when this was happening? And yes, I was absolutely conscious. It's not one of these instances where you lose consciousness for whatever reason. I was completely conscious. The bus didn't hit me, as you would have gathered. And I managed to crawl across the road with the one arm that was working. And I clung to a lamppost. And I will always remember someone came along who ran a creative design shop in that street.
Yeah.
And I knew her from some business networking that I was doing. And she looked at me clinging to this lamppost like a drunk. And she said to me, I always remember she said to me, "Are you all right?" And I thought, well, apart from the fact that I'm completely paralysed down the one side and I've got this explosive headache and I've just nearly been run over by a bus. Yeah.
Oh, God.
But I said to her, no, I'm not all right. I need some help. So she and the person that she was with dragged me into her shop, which was only like 5 yards away. And they called the paramedic. Paramedic was there within a couple of minutes because it was in the town centre. Paramedics sat me down, did some tests, gave me a drink of water, which is the solution to everything, isn't it? In these instances, he did a series of tests, including the fast test. And people listening to this will again know what the fast test is. And he said to me, "I think you've had a stroke. You need to be in hospital." And my first reaction, and I'm sure it's everyone's first reaction, was, "Well, I'm 49. I can't possibly have had a stroke. Strokes only ever happen to your 80-year-old gran. I can't possibly have had a stroke." But he called an ambulance, blue lighted me off to our local hospital, which took probably 10 minutes. They took me into the stroke unit. They did some more tests, and then they said, "You've definitely had a stroke. You're going nowhere until we work out what's happened and why." So that was how I ended up in the stroke unit at my local hospital. There is an awful lot more to tell after that, but I'm thinking, Sheelagh, there might be something that you want to ask.
Oh gosh, I'm just, you were so lucky. I think from, the buses, I mean, that must have been so scary.
Yes.
I can't even begin to imagine, it was scary what you were going through, having the stroke, but on top of that, to deal with the buses and everything. So thankfully this person saw that you needed help. But I think you're right in saying a lot of people have the same reaction as you. I'm only such an age, I can't be having a stroke, because I think we're all guilty of thinking, well, we're all made to think that stroke is something that happens to people that are a lot older. And we don't often get any signs that this is going to happen to us, do we?
I had absolutely no warning whatsoever until I stepped off that pavement.
Yeah.
I was perfectly okay. But since I've had the stroke and since I've got more and more involved in the stroke community, I've obviously met, I would say, certainly hundreds and probably thousands of people that have had strokes. And I know people in their teens that have had strokes. I think I've said previously in this interview that I know hundreds of people now who have had strokes of all ages and in all circumstances, and I know that age has absolutely nothing to do with it. As I've said previously, I run a podcast about stroke awareness and the difficulties that stroke survivors have become very clear to me as a result of that podcast. I interviewed last year a retired neurological consultant who said to me that the trouble is that the NHS has the resources to keep people alive after they have a stroke, and it has the resources to get them out of hospital in a reasonably decent condition, but it just doesn't have the resources to deal with them on a long-term basis when they're out of hospital, and to look after them and to help them in for as long as it takes after they're out of hospital. And that's where I think charities like Different Strokes, who can provide that support, are so important.
Well, I mean, we can provide the sort of stroke survivor to stroke survivor support, but a lot of stroke survivors are needing medical support as well, which they just can't seem to get access to.
Medical support in what way?
Physio, access to neurologists and things like that. Anything that could be connected with the ongoing issues of, stroke.
I see a neuropsychologist every month or so, And I've been seeing this neuropsychologist or their predecessors ever since I had my stroke in December 2013. But that really was a lottery in itself, because what happened was that one of the occupational therapists I was seeing during my rehabilitation was concerned about the way that I wasn't dealing with the mental aspects of stroke survival, and she referred me to a neuropsychologist. If I hadn't had that referral, I'd never have met this neuropsychologist, who has been really, really helpful. And I know someone who lives in East Lancashire whose wife had a stroke about 18 months ago, and I mentioned to him last week or the week before that I was seeing a neuropsychologist, and he asked me how he goes about doing that, because his wife now wants to see a neuropsychologist and talk about the mental aspect of it. And I spoke to my neuropsychologist, and she said the first thing you have to do is get a referral from your GP. But if the GP won't give you that referral, where do you go?
Exactly. You know, some GPs are more helpful than others, or they might know a bit more about stroke than others. So again, you know, bit of a postcode lottery, I think.
In my experience, the number of GPs who know anything about stroke is incredibly minimal.
And especially younger stroke as well, or working age stroke as well.
Yes, I mean the problem is, of course, that the clue is in the title. General practice, they have to know a bit about everything, and they don't have the specialised knowledge of stroke that you or I have, for instance.
Yes, it's very frustrating, I think, for all of us stroke survivors. And I've heard good things about people that have seen neuropsychologists like yourself, how much they've helped them, and you think, you know, well, could this help a lot more stroke survivors as well? But it just doesn't seem very common out there.
No, I don't think it is. I mean, I think there are 3 neuropsychologists covering South Staffordshire, and none of them is full time. The chances of seeing one, if you're not already in the system, are not great.
Yes.
The fact I've been in the system for 7-8 years, so I can get a chance to speak to someone, but I've had letters from them in the past where they're patently obviously trying to get you off their books and refer you back to the GP. And I've said, no, I don't want to be referred back to my GP, because if you do that, there's a very good chance that I'll never get back into the system if I need you again. And I mean, as I said before, I was a journalist for 30 years, so I'm snotty about these things. I know how to get things done.
Yes.
And I don't take no for an answer.
Yeah.
But there are so many disabled people, so not just stroke survivors, disabled people generally, who don't have the wherewithal or the ability or the knowledge to be like that. And so when someone says no, they just give up. It's like dealing with the DWP.
Yes, they just don't have the energy within themselves to fight it.
No, to deal with the DWP, you have to have a certain degree of knowledge, and you have to have a certain degree of tenacity, which I like to think I've got because of my journalistic training. But there are so many people out there who haven't.
It's a shame. So how's life for you now as a stroke survivor then? What?
I got up this morning and I was breathing.
That's a very good start to the day.
That is my stock answer to the question, how are you? I got up this morning and I'm breathing, because, as I've said earlier in this interview, I so very nearly wasn't there. So you have to treasure every day. You have to appreciate every day. If you have a rough day, and I've had a few rough days lately because of various things. You just have to put it behind you and say, okay, tomorrow will be better.
Yeah.
This is why I'm so much into things like mindfulness. Live in the moment. Think about now. Worry about now. Worry about not worry about. Control the things you can control, and the stuff you can't control, well, you can't do anything about it. So just let it go.
That's it. And much as some of us would like to, you can't go back in the past and change what's happened either. So, you know, you've just got to get on with how life is now.
The worst thing you can do is ask, why me? Because it's happened and you can't change it and it's done. Yeah. And you will probably never know why me. So what's the point in worrying about it?
Exactly. I totally agree with you there. I think it's hard. We get phone calls from people a lot of the time, and it's sometimes hard for them because they've just had their stroke and they're just coming to terms with the fact that they've had a stroke and they can't see the wood for the trees. And, you know, that's a hard phone call to take, because, you know, you can say, you know, in time it'll get better or what have you, but that's not what anybody wants to hear at that moment in time, because, you know, the future seems very distant.
When in my case, when you've lost your role as the breadwinner in your family, when you've lost your career, when you've lost a lot of the faculties that you had as a normal 49-year-old, there are a lot of questions.
Yes.
And it's very easy to worry about those questions, but you're not doing yourself any favors by worrying about those questions.
No, certainly not. So what do you get up to on a day-to-day basis then?
I saw a fantastic comment on, I'm sure it was a Different Strokes Facebook group the other day, when someone was saying about stroke fatigue, and my consultant said to me a long time ago, if you have a busy day one day, then have a quiet day the following day. And somebody was talking about that in the Facebook group, and they said, you have to take the Frank Sinatra approach. Do, be, do, be, do. And I thought, that's absolutely right. And yesterday, for instance, I was really busy because I had a lot on, and we're having a new kitchen fitted, and it was chaos. But that's all done now. So today, apart from this interview, I'm doing nothing. I have a lot of, as I said, I do the blog, I do the podcast. I talk to a lot of medical professionals and stroke survivors on Zoom calls, because I've stopped networking around the country because I found it was tiring me out. It was expensive and it was time consuming. Especially now we've all discovered Zoom and we can do it from our spare bedrooms. Yes. So I tend to do that a lot now. But if I'm busy in the mornings, I'm quiet in the afternoons, and vice versa. You have to do that, otherwise you'll just end up wearing yourself out again, and I can't afford to do that.
Yes, and I think if you keep on going and going and going, eventually it's like someone switches the off button and you just shut down completely.
Absolutely.
You know, and then you're no use to yourself, let alone anybody else.
The other stock phrase that I hear a lot, and it's incredibly true: you're no good to anybody if you're dead.
Yes.
So look after yourself.
Yes.
Your own life jacket first. And I'm doing all this stroke awareness work, the blog and the podcast and everything else, and it helps people, or I like to think it helps people. But if I wear myself down to the point where I can't do it,
yes,
then I'm not helping anybody.
No, That's very true. That's very true. And I think fatigue is a hard thing for stroke survivors to come to terms with and work out what their own limits are in terms of fatigue and how to recover from that fatigue. Everyone's got different, some people need to completely go to sleep, because some people seem to just need peace and quiet for a few hours. So it's learning, you know, and like we said, not going and going and going like we used to pre-stroke. You could push yourself and push yourself and push yourself, and you might be a bit tired the next day, but you get over it, kind of thing. It's totally different now. And you know, fatigue was never even mentioned when I was in hospital, so it was a bit of a shock when, you know, you come out and you think, oh, what's happening here? But, you know, the Different Strokes Facebook group, I'm not a great poster on Facebook, even on my personal Facebook. I just read a lot. And it was fantastic for finding out that, you know, this was just the new normal. You know, fatigue was a real thing. And you think, oh, thank goodness for that, you know. And you learn to cope with it.
You try to learn to cope with it.
Yes.
Some days you will, some days you won't. And that's just the way it has to be. That's just the way you have to approach it.
Yes. Some days it sneaks up on you. I will admit to that.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I think if you learn the coping techniques for your own personal, you know, situation and everything, then you've just got to sort of be tough. And if you need peace and quiet, you have to say to everybody, I'm going to sit on my own for a few hours and what have you. And like you say, put yourself top of the list. But I think that's one thing we're not very good at doing, especially, you know, if we have others to look after and what have you. And, you know,
my neuropsychologist set up an 8-week course at the end of last year, which was called, I can't remember what it was called, but it was about being compassionate to yourself when you have a long-term health condition. And it delivered techniques like mindfulness and, you know, all the other stuff about being compassionate to yourself on the basis of this, you know, your own life jacket first kind of thing. And I thought it was really helpful. But I've heard of nothing else like that throughout the health service. This was a trial scheme. It's the first time they've ever done it. They certainly will do another one. But I just wonder how many other trusts throughout the NHS do anything like that. I shouldn't think there are very, very many.
I've never heard anybody else talk about it, so I don't think there's many doing it. It's certainly it's an important lesson to learn, and it's one that needs delivering, I think, because we say to ourselves, I won't be bottom of the list, but that's easier said than done, especially if you've got a young family as well. You know, as a mum, I'm always bottom of the list in the house. You know, everyone else is above it. But if you have very young children, you're definitely down the bottom of the list, and it must be very hard to put yourself up there and look after yourself. But if you had some techniques that you could draw on, that maybe when the children went to bed, you could sit there and draw on these techniques to sort of recover from your day, if that's the word, you know, or even just if you can grab a cup of tea during the day and sit in a seat and draw on these techniques and things like that, you know, even a tiny little 5 minutes can make a big difference.
Yeah, I agree.
So it's something, you know, you think could be rolled out nationally, but easier said than done.
Easier said than done. Yeah. Right, I'm starting to, talking about fatigue, I'm starting to flag now. Right. So can we bring this to a close?
We certainly can. And thank you very much for talking to us. And it's been very interesting. And I'm still thinking about you and your buses and everything. That must have been terribly frightening. It's frightening enough being ill, but without a huge bus coming towards you. But thank you very much for talking to us today, Martin.
Thank you.